Hello, everybody. My name is Malia Price, and for my data analysis, I decided to use what my plan was for my research project that I'm conducting. And currently, I teach reading, and my school has adopted Acadians. They adopted it last year. So I'm a little bit familiar with understanding how to use this data and looking at exactly where my areas of need are with my students, as well as where maybe they are fluent enough. So they have two different ways for testing these different areas of need or strengths in that case. One way is for my students to read a one-page document and they only have a minute to read as much as they can. It's a cold read. They don't have any information ahead of time. And then when they are done reading for the 1 minute, they're then only have a minute to explain what they just read, and they are being tested on fluency as well as accuracy, and then also their ability to summarize the text. Now, a benchmark will have the students do this 3 times. And then when they do it the 3 times, I would take the middle number. It's not the average number. You don't have to calculate anything. It's just that you would take the number that's in the middle, and that would be for the fluency, that would be for the accuracy, as well as the summary. You would take the middle number. And that's one way that we are testing the data. But the other way is through a maze, is what it's called. And students only have 3 minutes to complete it. I also used I went to the Acadians website and kind of showed an example here because it might not be familiar with some people. But what it does is it tests the student's ability to not only comprehend what you're reading, but it also tests the ability of their vocabulary. So what students would have to do is they would have to read a text. Usually it's about 2 to 3 pages long. They would get as far as they can, but as you can see, there are boxes, and in these boxes are multiple words. They would have to circle what they believe is the correct word that goes into the sentence. Now, with that being said, they want to have as many circled as possible, but accuracy does matter. It does have half the points would be calculated in a certain way where it would count against you. So it's not only how many, but it's also the accuracy. So what I did is I administered my Acadians in the beginning of the school year for my benchmarks, and that was able to kind of determine exactly where my areas of need and where my areas of strength were with my students. So I currently have pie charts. This is what I use for the beginning of the year just to kind of make it easier and see exactly where the areas of need and growth were. Um, Blue would be the above level where it comes to where they should be at the beginning of the year for fifth grade. Green is where they should be when they're on level. Yellow and red would be either below or well below. So, in the beginning of the year for fluency, my students are supposed to be able to read 111 words per minute on average. So, as you can see, I also have my percentages down here. In my first class, I have almost 71% who were able to already meet this goal in the beginning of the year. I also have almost 76% that met it in the beginning of the year in the other class. So I felt this wasn't really an area of concern based upon the fact of that I have a significant amount of students who are able to read where they should be on level at this point in time. So then I looked at the accuracy. So this doesn't only just worry about the fluency where they have to read words in a certain amount of time, but they also have to make sure they're reading it accurately. So in the beginning of the year, their goal is at least 98% accuracy, and that would be what the green area is, and then 99 to 100% would be where it's going to be above level. As you can see in my first class, I had 79% who were able to do that, and my second class was 68%. Although my second class was a little bit lower, if you average the two out, it's still going to be a little bit above 70%. So I still felt this wasn't really necessarily a need. but could be revisited if something else were not an area. So then I looked at my summary scores. So summary is a little bit different because, as you can see, there's no blue. It is not possible for you to have above level when it comes to a summary because there's only a 4, 3, 2, 1 possibility. A 4 is still considered to be on grade level as well as a 3. In the beginning of the year, a 2 would be considered on grade level, but by the end of the year, the student should be at least a 3. So this one looks a little bit different because if you're yellow or green, then you're going to actually be exactly where you need to be. So my first class had a 91.7% accuracy when it comes to being able to summarize the text. And that just means that they were either able to give me a main idea and or 3 supporting sequential details. So, in order for you to have a 2, you would have to tell me 3 sequential details. And then in order for you to have a 3, you would have to do both. And as we talked about, my first class was a 91.7%, and my second class was able to all do this. And then my maze results was the one that I felt was going to be the area of need for sure. And it wasn't really a surprise to me because my students last year also struggled with this. The maze doesn't only just look at the reading comprehension, but it also looks at vocabulary, which I feel is a struggle for a lot of students who don't have as much of a variety of words that they use on a regular basis, but also a lot of words that come up. And also, it seems like when I have a lot of conversations with them and they're able to read the text, they're not always willing to say they don't know what the word means. So vocabulary was definitely, I think, an area of concern. And as you can see, in my first class, 66.7% of the students were either at or above. And then my second class was only a 54%. So this kind of told me that this was the lowest out of all the options that we talked about. So this should definitely be an area that I'm focusing on, not just vocabulary, but maybe even the reading comprehension aspect. And then overall, my students were pretty close when it comes to either being at or above. About 68% of my students were, which is pretty good for the beginning of the year based upon um, what I am seeing from the past. So, what I decided to do was I not only went through and looked at my pros and my cons. So, my pros, as we just talked about, 70% of my students were able to be fluent, but I also had 70% of the students who were able to read accurately. My summarizing, I had over 95% at the beginning of the year who were able to do it correctly, as well as making sure they're giving me details and or main idea. I had students, almost 70% of my students who were either at or above grade level. So that was all pros for me. I felt that that was a pretty good start to the year. As we talked about the cons, looking at where their areas of strengths and weaknesses, their weakness definitely is the maze. So that means I need to work on figuring out exactly what to do when it comes to this maze. Sometimes I've noticed that it's not just reading comprehension and or vocabulary, but it's also one of two other things. The beginning of the year, students have done the maze, but for some reason they usually forget what the maze is in comparison to them reading to me. So when I give them the 3 minutes, a lot of students think, wow, 3 minutes is a lot of time. And then they realize by the end that 3 minutes went by so fast and they didn't have as much time or they didn't actually work to their best ability. So usually I see a huge difference between the first and second maze that I give, and whether that's progress monitoring or not, it really doesn't seem to have a difference. Um, the second thing I've noticed is that sometimes students don't like to read the whole entire story. They'll read only where the boxes are and then try to fill in the blanks. And sometimes context clues just in the sentence that they're reading is not going to necessarily give you what you need. So this is a strategy that I've been working on within my classroom after especially looking at these scores, just trying to help them come up with strategies um, as well. And then from there, what I did was is I created my charts, but I also looked at averages, as you can see here. I also, after reading the text, considered the median. And I was just curious to see if the median was somewhat relevant or even close to what the average would have been. So that way I wasn't being misled by maybe possible skew data, especially because I have some students who are gifted in one of the classes. And I also, though, have students who I feel may end up needing a little bit of additional support than what what might not be expected in just a classroom in general. So I didn't want to have any skewed data, so I decided to do a little bit of both when it came to certain things. So as you can see in my down here is my average, my median. Most of them were actually pretty close. So that told me that my data didn't really seem to be too much swayed or skewed based upon what I have. Even over here, my median was a little bit off in comparison, but here it was exactly dead on. So that kind of told me that my data seemed to be okay looking at the overall. At the bottom though, I have my goals. The goal is for the end of the year. So as you can see with my one class, their average almost made the goal when it comes to fluency. So that kind of just reassured me that I don't think that that's something that they should be focusing on. My accuracy as well, as you can see, almost both classes were at 98%. And that was their goal for the beginning of the year. And it's going to be at 99% as their goal for the end of the year. So I'm not really concerned about that as much. Um, for their summary, that one was a little bit of a concern for me because, as you can see, their goal is a 3, but most of the students ended up by the average at the end was like a 2.5. So that means at least half of my students are not actually doing what would be expected for a summary at the end of the year. So that kind of can become an area of focus for me as well. But the maze, as you can see, although the beginning of the year, the goal was actually for them to have an 18, and both classes made that goal. But the end of the year is a 24. So I think that a lot of students are going to end up needing a lot more additional help when it came to the maze as well as the summarizing, which is what I decided to do my main focus on. So when it comes to looking at what I want to do for uh, my main focus of instruction, I decided that one, I would need to focus on the maze, and I'm doing this in a couple of different ways. Um, the first way that I'm doing it is through my reading comprehension. In the beginning of the school year, we always do book clubs. The students are able to choose what book they would like to read, and I usually give them options, making sure that it's still on grade level for that particular student, making sure they're able to read it independently. And what we do is every other day, I have a meeting with them after they read a chapter of the book, and we have a discussion. And they're able to tell me exactly what's happening in the story. They're able to, brainstorm different things they think are going to happen in the story, but also going through the different parts of a story using the story arc. And doing that and reinforcing it is really helpful when it comes to making sure that they're understanding what they're reading. The second thing that I do, and it's on a weekly basis, is I give students a vocabulary word. I do this by giving them a pre-assessment first, and then they are able to try to figure out the definitions of each one of the words, and then I assign them a word based upon the words I didn't actually know on the pre-assessment. But what I also do, which helps with the context clues aspect of a maze, is every single week I always spend a couple of minutes in the beginning of the time period where we talk through a couple of sentences, and one of their vocab words is highlighted in the sentence, and they have to figure out what the context clue that is being given. So whether it's a synonym, whether it's an anonym, whether it's an example, whether it's an inference, whether it's literally coming out and telling you the definition. And they have to figure out what is giving away the information in the actual sentences as to what the meaning of the word is when they're making that prediction. And I'm hoping, and I've seen in the past when I've used this last year, my students also struggled with mazes last year as well, that it seemed to really help build their understanding as to what to do when they are given those types of problems, and they have to figure out what word should go in that blanks. And as we talked about, a summary, which kind of actually coincides with the maze instruction that I'm already giving. So I'm hoping that it also will end up helping improve their scores. So I'm hoping that when I have my progress monitoring that I am actually coming up with in the next week or two, that I'm really hoping that I see at least a little bit of improvement before I do my next benchmark to see what their progress is. Thank you for listening.